I want to talk about why is the Kemetic tomb so important? Why is it important, and why is it significant? As we talk about and celebrate things like Juneteenth and Happy Juneteenth and the whole idea of connection to ancestors, this is so important. And I had intended to do this talk today and to talk about temples and to talk about why the Kemetic temple was so important and the connection with the temple. But instead of temple, as I was just writing this and typing this, tomb just came out. Instead of temple, tomb came out. So that was very important to me. And it started to really sink in on me how today is Juneteenth. So it's June 19th. And we're celebrating Juneteenth. And I think about the whole idea and the ancestry behind slavery and how obviously the people in Texas and when they were told and how they were told about the end of enslavement as the people in Texas continue to keep thousands and thousands of African Americans in slavery, even though the Civil War was pretty much was over and they had lost. They were continue to keep people as human chattel and to abuse people, to kidnap them. It's just straight up abuse and discrimination and disgusting. And I think about that. I think about what our ancestors went through. I think about the strength that is in the body and the minds of our ancestors, the strength that's in their heart, and how it's so important for us to be able to connect with that. Right. And I think about that with respect to the Kemetic tomb, because the tomb, I mean, when you look at ancient Kemet, it's literally all about the tomb. I mean, many things center around the tomb. They center around their relationship with God, their connection with God, and they center around the afterlife. And they built for the afterlife for eternity. So a lot of things center around the tomb, especially when it comes to your connection with the ancestors. So as I think about that, and I think about the significance of Juneteenth, and I think about how so many people went through the horribleness of slavery, the horrors of slavery. And, many of us have maybe done, research and look back in our past and found people who we knew were enslaved in our family, and just think about how that affected them, how it affected your life, how it affected your grandparents and your great-grandparents' lives and so forth, and how that's gone through the generations and just what they had to go through. The idea of connecting with them, the idea of remembering your ancestors, the idea of remembering somebody, even if there's somebody who's recently passed, whether they passed a long time ago or in the recent past, people remembering them. It is so important and it's so significant. And that's a real part of African spirituality. It's a real part of African theology. It's a real part of African American ancestry and African American history, that idea of connecting with your ancestors and connecting with those who have passed on. And so to me, it's not just something that's just kind of cursory or fly by night or something. It really is something that's serious. And I think that's part of something that we're losing. It's something that I know a lot of people around the world do this. A lot of people, look at their ancestry and are very serious about it. And then some people, are maybe not as serious as others. And as time has moved on, people haven't kept up the traditions. But when it comes to African American traditions, it's a part of our traditions that we've kind of lost or in a process of losing, which I hope we never lose. The whole idea of connecting with our ancestors, remember what grandma and grandpa and your great grandparents and things that they said and what they passed on, really connecting with that. And when we understand the significance of them in our lives and how the people that we've touched and who've touched us, how it impacts us, how, your mother, your grandparents, how their words and their wisdom and their strength may have touched you. But it's important for us not to lose that connection, because we can become so modernized where we're concerned about, the latest thing that happens on TV or fashion or those, where we don't even connect with our history. I think about it in terms of, and I know I was talking about this before, and I appreciate those who kind of commented down below as I talked about music and some things like that. Even with our music, a lot of times we talk about the significance of gospel music and the significance of what they were saying. And there is a passage in Frederick Douglass's narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, and he is talking about how people, and he talked about when he was enslaved in Maryland and how his mom used to come visit him and have to walk 12 miles in the evening time as fast as she could to go visit him overnight and then try to leave to get back in time so that she wouldn't get a beaten and whipped in the morning, because she was sneaking away, obviously, away from a plantation so she could see her children who were being enslaved on another plantation by the person who was probably his father, who probably raped her. He talks about that, and he talks about, the times when people had to walk through the woods when they were given permission to go from one plantation, from one place to another, when they were given papers to do so, and how you could hear them singing. And he said, I wish I could put into words what it sounded like to hear those women and men sing as they were walking through the wooded areas there in Maryland, and we were enslaved, walking through the wooded areas, going from one place, one plantation to another to pick up something or carrying food or doing something they were tasked to do. He said you could hear them singing and their voices would ring through the woods. It would ring through the area. And he said, if I could just put into words, the sadness, he said, in one way it was a sense of happiness, maybe because they had some semblance of freedom, and a sense of sadness that you just can't even put into words. He said, I wish I could sum it up, but it summed up basically the horrors of slavery, the horrors and the human soul singing for freedom. It summed it up in such a way he said I could never do. He said, even when I think about it now, he said, I'm trying to convey to you as I'm writing this book and writing about my life, what I felt and the sentiments of hearing those people. And he was a younger child at the time, listening to the adults as they sang. He said, I'm trying to convey to you in writing what I felt when I heard those people sing as they were walking through the woods. He said, but I can't even do it. And now as I'm thinking about it and remembering it, tears are rolling down my eyes, and dropping on the paper upon which I'm writing, as I think about the sentiments that were in their voice. The whole idea of what they were experiencing in slavery and the whole idea of enslavement. There was a woman whose name is Mom Beth, and you can look her up. It's a famous woman who was in Massachusetts, who was freed under some very specific circumstances. And maybe I'll talk about her and do a little a program on her. But, she is quoted as saying, one time in her life, because she was one of the early people to be freed in Massachusetts when they were changing their constitution. She said, she's quoted as saying, if at any time while I was in slavery, if at any time while I was enslaved, if 1 minute of freedom had been offered to me, and I was told that at the end of those 60 seconds, I would die, I would gladly have taken it just to spend 60 seconds on God's green earth, a free woman. And when you think about it, to me, that sums up slavery. To me, that sums it up. And when I think about that, when you think about that, what she's saying is a freedom that's beyond material things. She's not saying because she's saying I would have died just to get 1 minute of freedom. I would have died after that 60 seconds, happy to have been free. Many people express that sentiment. Harriet Tubman, many people express that kind of sentiment. Just being free, not having money. They're not talking about material things. They're not talking about lust. They're not talking about shoes. They're not talking about any of these things a lot of people sing about now. And the songs we sing about, they're talking about something that goes beyond material things. And when you think about ancient Kemetic, you think about what they were talking about in terms of Ma'at, what they were talking about in terms of what they were connecting with. It was beyond the physical. It was beyond the material things that we store it for. I was talking about, when you think about the teachings of Mercari, which I talked about before, as well as Hajjef, and talking about, them talking about that the house that you build in death, the home that you build for your death is really for your life. It's really for life. It's really where you spend your eternity. The whole idea of being able to have peace, and the whole idea of balancing your heart on the balance, and having Hotep and peace in your heart, not just in the manifestation of God and God being happy, but God being happy in you. Right? Through you being able to channel that is beyond material things. And when I think about what Frederick Douglass was saying, what people like Harriet Tubman said, what people like Sojourner Truth, what they were talking about on Mum Bet in Massachusetts, what they were talking about is a freedom that goes beyond material things. And what they were singing about, what Frederick Douglass was talking about, what they were singing about was something that was beyond material. It was a freedom that has to do with self-dignity, what has to do with self-worth, that has to do with self-determination, what has to do with peace, what has to do with being able to love who you want to love, your family, and see your family grow up in safety and in peace. It's a freedom that's beyond material things. And that's what the singing was about. That's where our gospel came from. I mean, it came from those experiences and those songs that were there when they were being forced to be enslaved and kidnapped and horribly treated by these evil people, by these people. They were singing about something beyond that. And our gospel came from that, and our R&B and our blues and jazz. And it's like we've lost the tradition of why we were singing. We lost the tradition that the music means something more than just lust and material things. We think that if you sing something material, that you're somehow getting something, that's somehow important, but that's not what they were talking about. They were talking about something much deeper than that. And so when I think about that, and I think about this Juneteenth, it connects with me. It connects with me from a standpoint of how do we understand our ancestors today, and how do we understand what they did yesteryear, right? What were they doing, and why was the Kemetic tomb so important? Why was that something that was such a significant thing? We're not talking about just materialism. People study ancient Kemet because they are excited about the gold and the big, huge buildings and how they did such scientific things so far in the past, and how you can look at the casing and the stones and the pyramids and not be able to even fit a knife in between them, that they were done and cut so well. They talk about these types of things, but they miss kind of they talk about the materialism of it. We are excited because these are materials that we can see, but I'm willing to guarantee you that there are civilizations probably all over the world, especially in Africa, whose structures have long gone, whose structures made out of brick that have now been washed away, because people have been in that area for hundreds of thousands. Human beings come from Africa. People have been in that area for hundreds of thousands of years. Not just for the past 5,000 years, not just for the past 10,000 years. People have been there for hundreds of thousands of years. Probably the things that they made structures out of, the things that they used were things that were biodegradable, that just after 10,000 years or 30,000 years goes. I'm willing to bet you that there are civilizations beyond Egypt, beyond Kemet, that were there in Africa and other places in the world who we may never know. Or maybe one day we'll find out about something. Maybe one day we'll know them, but that they were there, and that this connection, we were excited about the material things, but not the significance of the tomb. And I'm willing to bet that some people in ancient Kemet, and this gentleman's name was Perneb. We're going to talk about his tomb today. Some people in ancient Kemet were excited and actually interested in the real stuff beyond the tomb, and not just the material things that they were being buried in. So let's consider for a moment that this is real. Let's consider for a moment that the idea of the tomb gives us a physical way to connect with our ancestors, a physical way to look at things beyond just the material of it, the materialism of it. And the reason why you give your best when you are giving offerings in the tomb or giving offerings to a deity is you're giving God your best. You're giving your ancestors your best effort. You're giving them the best of you. And that best is really represented by what's in your heart. And the physicalness of that is just a manifestation of that. That's just an example of what you're doing. That's just the outgrowth of what's already in your heart, because you've decided to give your best. So as I talk about this, and you guys know I like to write. So I'm writing about this and keeping documents with all this as I talk about this. I think about, one of the biggest examples of a tomb in ancient Kemet, or tombs, are the Great Pyramids, right? And when you think about the Great Pyramids, they are a collection of not just the tombs themselves. They're not just the kings that are there. They're, Menkaure and Khafre and Khufu. There are other people like queens and other officials, but there are also temples there. And those temples make those tombs come alive. And there's a connection with it. So as I think about that and kind of give you just a little bit of a closer look, if you will, at the pyramid, I want to kind of point this out, because as I look at this, if you look at the buildings that are right there on the lower right hand side of the screen, you see that that's the east side of Khafre's tomb, of his pyramid, of his tomb. And what you see there is essentially a temple. There's a temple right there on the east side of these three pyramids that are there, the Great Pyramids of Giza. You found temples that are there. And beyond those temples, you're going to find those temples are going to be connected with other temples. So as we see that and we start to kind of walk through that, we find that the tombs are not there just by themselves. The temples mean something, right? The temples have significance. And I want to kind of scroll to this as I kind of give you some examples of that. The temples have significance. So they're not just there just to be for show. They actually have significance and meanings, and they were the places within which the human beings, the family members of the deceased person, or the priests who were hired or who were responsible for keeping up that person's funerary offerings, or keeping up that person's, even their spirit alive, lifting them up and remembering their life and remembering what they gave to them, that was a place, that was where they connected. So the tomb and the temple went together and they came alive. That the temple made the tomb come alive, so to speak. In a sense, in some kind of way, it's not quite the way we use churches today, right? We don't necessarily use churches in that way, but in some respects, there's some leftover thing to that we haven't heard that we'll talk about in just a second. So as I look at this, I'm going to show you, this is the tomb of Perneb. This is the Mastaba of them. And I want to kind of give like a little perspective of that. This is Perneb in this picture right here. That's him, and his tomb dates back to like the 5th dynasty, dates back to the Old Kingdom. And as we start to look at it, I want to give you an idea of just what his tomb looked like, right? Just to give us an example of the connections and ways we can maybe use things to help us connect with our ancestors. This is just not about sharing the history of it. It's just not about, saying one thing or another. It's actually giving us ideas and ways that we can connect with our ancestors. So this is an example and a depiction. You will find this at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. This is open access, public domain. You will find this at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. they have a copy of this tomb, and this tomb, this mastaba, is literally a rectangular figure. As you can see, it's a rectangular figure, and this is they used mastabas before they began to use pyramids, before the step pyramid. In fact, they think the step pyramid is literally just a collection of mastabas, smaller and smaller on top of each other, so you kind of make a pyramid-like structure. And it was the step pyramid of Dozier in the 3rd dynasty, and then finally you get to the 4th dynasty where they made what we call true pyramids, right? But these mastabas were rectangular structures that were kind of sloped. When they had a sloped kind of edges to them, and so they kind of rose a little bit, almost like a mound, almost like a burial mound rising up out of the ground. And a lot of times they were made with mud brick, so you're going to see mud brick used a lot in Nubia and in ancient Kerma. You're going to see mud brick used in the temples there. They were used with mud brick a lot. Sometimes they were used with stone or combined with stone. So mud brick wasn't just used in the Sudan or Nubia. Kemetic people used mud brick too. So they used mud brick in ancient Egypt and Kemet until they started doing more things with stone. And even after they started doing things with stone, a lot of times they combined, even pyramids after this, mud brick and stone. So it all depends on, what was going on, what they had access to, and what they developed. So you see this model of this mastaba here, the mastaba of Perneb, and inside it you're going to find that there are all these very interesting things that you can find in terms of just what's inside the tomb and what made that connection. I want to kind of jump on that and talk about that a little bit, because as you start to look at it, you start to see that there's a bunch of stuff in there where there are compartments that you can walk through and look through that allowed you to be able to interact with and talk with and interact with a person who may be on the other side, if you will. So how was that set up and what did they do? So I want to kind of jump in and show you just a little bit of a perspective of that. As I look at it, this is like a bird's eye view of that same mastaba. So this is a bird's eye view of the tomb I just showed you from Perneb, who was an official in the Old Kingdom in Dynasty 5 and the 5th Dynasty or thereabouts. And this is his tomb, and they have part of his tomb actually in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. They have part of his tomb, and you can walk through it, but they also made a model of it to give you an idea what it looked like, because they only have part of it, what it looked like in terms of the entire structure, if you will. So if you take a look at that and we kind of get some perspective of that, let's just jump into it and look at it a little bit. And as I take this and I'll kind of let you get a look at it, take myself away, you'll see that at the top, this is the tomb of Perneb, and you will find that there was this compartment here that was a false door. So this is one of the main areas where the family members could come in and interact with a person. So you initially had a courtyard down here where you could walk through, and I believe this building was shared with someone else. I believe that one of his walls was shared with another person whose tomb was kind of adjoining to his. And you found this walkway where you could walk in if you were a family member, if you were a part of the mastaba of Perneb, and you were visiting, and maybe you were a priest or you were a loved one. You could walk in through this courtyard, right through that door. You walk in through the courtyard, and there are a number of places you can go. So if you look right up here, you could go through this little vestibule here, and this is the vestibule, little waiting area, kind of small, and you could walk in through the left, and this was kind of like the main area where you could leave offerings for Perneb. So this is a false door, and I'll give you a little bit of a picture of that just real quickly. This was the false door, and it was believed that the person's soul and spirit would come back through that false door and maybe partake in the food that you would leave for him and the offerings that you would give him. And when we think about offerings, we're really talking about just connection with your ancestors. We're really talking about an outward expression to harness the energy that you're already feeling inside. I mean, that's really what it is, right? Think about a thought, or think about a word that you may say. You can say something like I'm saying something to you right now. All this outward verbalization is just an expression of what I'm already feeling and thinking inside. So a lot of times your outward expressions, they are really just mimicking and mirroring the energy that you have on the inside. They're coming forth from inside you. So even though the offerings may, some people might say, hey, is that a silly thing to do? It's not silly if it's coming from the inside. It's not silly if it means something. If you do something and it gives you a certain amount of peace, if you perform a ritual or ceremony and it connects you with your ancestors, it connects you with a level of understanding or a level of peace or a level of coming to terms with something that may be difficult for you to come to terms with, then it's successful. Like, it doesn't matter. I mean, like, why would you be mad about spending what it is, $5 or $10 or whatever it is you might spend on a ritual or a ceremony that brought you peace, when we sometimes spend way, way, way more money or way much money or time on things that bring us nothing. Right? I mean, people will spend 3 to 5 hours in front of a television. We'll do it. I've done it. Obviously, watching sports or watching TV or watching a movie, and get up and not even enjoy what you just watched. Imagine spending 3 to 5 hours of your life doing something you don't even enjoy. And you wake up from like, why did I even do? You get up from that like, why did I even do that? Or spending a lot of money on something, hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars in something that gave you nothing, gave you no enjoyment, gave you no peace, but yet you spent a lot of money on it. And then imagine doing it over and over again. Like people do that for all kinds of rituals. I mean, they smoke or they abuse drugs. They do that for all kinds of things. Maybe they participate in things that they really don't enjoy doing. Maybe they eat something that you really just know you shouldn't be eating, but you spend money on it and eat it anyway and then get sick later. There's so many things that we do that we spend money and valuable time on. And even more important, that thoughts on. We spend thoughts, which are very important to just they are like the fields of our mind. They are the fertile fields of our life. What you think about, what you meditate on, what you breathe on, what you listen to, what you take into your heart are really the things that help you bring forth manifestations in your life. They bring forth things. We spend a lot of precious time and thought and money and energy on things that give us nothing. But if you spent time and energy and money on things that brought you peace, that brought you closer to an understanding, that brought you closer to your ancestors, then why is that? Why would that not be significant, right? So as you think about this tomb, this is where his family came. This is where his family, who are now somebody else's ancestors, would have come. They would have come into this courtyard. They would have come into one of these vestibules, and they would have walked into that false door, and they would have walked to that false door, and they would have left resources, offerings, and things that will help them remember Perneb, things that would help his name be spoken, so that in the afterlife he would have a peaceful time, so that his energy, his name would be remembered, so that they can connect with him and believe in this very real connection, very real peaceful connection with your ancestors, so they can bring to you whatever it is they have to offer from the other side. And so you look at this is what this compartment right here will be doing in this, where the false room and the false door was, and in this little chapel right here above that, you see the shaft. So that shaft right there is the shaft where his sarcophagus was buried, was lowered down into. So it depends on how they did it. In some instances, in some places, they were able to lower the sarcophagus more than likely before they finished the complete capping off of the structure. In some instances, they may have lowered it and had maybe a priest go down and perform the rites. And obviously, this would have happened after a ceremony of taking him from probably where he lived, maybe from his home or wherever his body was being kept after it was mummified and treated and prepared. And a whole procession would have taken place. A whole procession would have taken place to his tomb. And his family would have been a part of it. If he had a son, his son would have been helping to lead it. It would have been priests live part of it. They would have been performing rites and rituals. They would have come into this area and they would have had a whole ceremony as they pulled it. And eventually they would have lowered his body down in the shaft, this long shaft, and buried him underneath in subterranean, underground, where he would have been his final resting place, if you will. And they would have capped off this area where the shaft was, so it would have been capped off. So hopefully his body would not have been disturbed. But it was believed that you could come back to life, that your spirit would live, and that then therefore you would be able to come and maybe visit your people or take any form you want. Really, they really believe that if you were a high person who was connected with God, that you could take any form you want. You could come back and you could interact. Your spirit can interact. And you could, come through this false door. Your spirit can interact, and you could interact with your family. You would see the food. You would eat the food. You would partake in the energy and the love offerings that people were giving you to help remember your name and to bring you back to life, so to speak, in the afterlife. And so they had another very interesting part of a tomb that was often there. And you found this in like the pyramid of Dozier, the step pyramid. Another interesting part right here on the left side of the screen. This was called like a serdab. And this was an area, if you kind of look up here, you can see this was an area where a statue of the deceased person was located. So in some of these tombs, you would have this little narrow area, and they would put like a life-size or a lifelike statue of that person in the tomb, right? And so you could go in and you would go into the tomb and you would walk in. So as you came in through this courtyard area, you see right here, you could come into the courtyard, and instead of going to the chapel, the temple where the false door was, you can go into this little chapel right here, and you could literally look at the statue. It was a little slit that was in the wall, be a little slit in the wall there, and you could see the statue of your deceased ancestor, your deceased loved one. So that was an interesting type of thing that they did. You could literally walk into the small area there on the bottom left and look at the statue, a lifelike statue, a life-size statue of the person for whom you were bringing the office and the person for whom you were either offering prayers or communication or some type of offering. So that was a different way to connect with it. And so you start to see the tomb, the Kemetic tomb, is something more than just an outward expression of of technology or an outward expression of materialism. Or we may be in awe or gawk at the fact that there was maybe gold in some of these resources, and that some things were lined with precious stones, and they got these stones from very far away, like in Aswan by the first cataract, or they went to Nubia and they got these precious stones, or they got some gold from Nubia, or some type of diorite, or they got some type of other animal skin or something like that, or they got some type of turquoise from the Sinai Peninsula. We're excited, but the tomb was more than that. They were giving their ancestors their best. They were giving their best in their offerings. I think about, the whole story of Abraham going to sacrifice Isaac under God's command. And as he goes to sacrifice Isaac, he travels days. You read the story, and I read it again recently. He doesn't travel like overnight. He travels a couple days, obviously having this on his mind that he's going to sacrifice his son, and he has his servants or his people with him. And then he has to go up to the mountain once they get to a certain point. He goes alone. He goes to sacrifice. And, just as he's about to sacrifice Isaac, and obviously you don't sacrifice kids. You don't do that, obviously. God tells him, stop. God says, I see you are willing to give me your best. I see that. I'm going to make you the father of a nation. I'm going to make all nations be blessed through you. I'm going to make you the father because you are willing to give me your best. Imagine and think about it. All we're saying, all the Kemetic people were saying, even long before this, that they were giving their best. They were giving their best offerings to their ancestors. They were giving their best to the deities and the expressions of God that they were thinking about. They were giving them their best. And the idea is that you would remember your ancestor forever. The whole idea for Perneb is that he would be remembered forever. And I guess in some ways we're talking about him now, thousands of years after his death, he's being remembered, right? Whatever he did with his life, whatever he did, remember, whatever he did, circumstances that allowed him to be remembered and for them to preserve his tomb and for his tomb not to be destroyed, he's being talked about. And so the whole idea is that you are giving offerings and communications and interactions with your ancestors that is your best. You're not giving, and you only you know in your heart, you and God know if what you're giving is your best. And I think about that in terms of anything. Whether you're a young kid and you're starting out in life and you're trying something in school and you're studying math or science or whatever you're studying, rocket science, whatever you're studying, are you giving your best? That's all God asks, because typically if you give your best at something, especially something that you love, you're going to be successful at it. Some type of success will come. Now, that success may or may not be what other people think. It doesn't matter, but you will find peace in your heart. You will find the affirmation that you are looking for by doing your best and giving your best to the things that God has put in your heart. And that's all this offering, that's all an offering is. And that's what they were talking about with respect to ancestors in the Kemetic tomb, was being able to provide a place where that person would be, whose life was being celebrated and remembered, would be remembered, and that the people who were doing this were not doing this just for perfunctory reasons, just for performing, that they were actually sincerely giving off what was in their heart and giving their best to their ancestors and giving their best in their offerings. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I'd love to see what you think about this topic. What are your thoughts? What is your opinion when it comes to connecting with your ancestors? What is your opinion as we think about Juneteenth, as we think about just ancestors in general? What is your opinion about this whole topic? The idea of connecting with your ancestors. How do you do it? Do you believe in that? Do you find there's solace in it? Do you think there's any importance to remembering them, not in just a cursory way, but in a deeper way in terms of what their lives bring to us? And what can we do? What can we do as people? What can we do as African Americans? What can we do as people in general to connect with that? I mean, the Kemetic people had a whole system around. I mean, these tombs that we're talking about is a whole system around being able to connect with the ancestors. It wasn't just connected with deities. That was very important. Obviously, the temples at Luxor and Karnak and Hecapata and Memphis and Anu and Heliop, that was very significant, connecting with deities. But connecting with your ancestors was also significant. And it wasn't just the king. He wasn't a king. He was an official. That was also very significant. What can we do now? What can we do in this century, right? What can we do now in this century to connect with our ancestors, and is it worth it? So I'd like to hear your opinion. I love to hear your opinion. Thank you so much for sharing. I'll be commenting down below. I thank you so much for sharing. God bless you, and I'll talk to you soon.